Hey, hello. Okay, this may be cutting it a little tight. I don't know how in-depth we're going to be able to get, but I really want to talk about the stage adaptation of A Little Life playing at the Brooklyn Academy of Music right now. It is a transfer of the Ivo Van Hove production. I have not seen this production, but have read a few of the reviews that have come in regarding the production, seen some online buzz about it, and a lot of the reviews and buzz I'm seeing around this production seem to vindicate a lot of the fears I've had about this production since the 2018-2019 Amsterdam production was announced. Now, I will say, according to Playbill, there is a dramaturg credited on this production, and dramaturgy is my theatrical focus. And with a project of this nature, regardless of how I feel about this production or what I think, I am very, very glad to see a dramaturg credited here because there is a lot to unpack with this production. And I think that having that role in that space is imperative. Now, on the book side of the internet, the A Little Life discourse has progressed a lot since the book debuted. We still have obviously very big, voracious fans of the book, but ever since its debut and the popularity from its debut, there have been conversations about the responsibility of the book, about how the pain of Jude is portrayed in the book, who that pain is being portrayed for, the level it goes to, and a lot of conversation around whether it can be considered basically torture porn. And my own thoughts around this book have morphed quite a bit over the years. I've only read it once when it first came out because it was such an intense and moving experience. And I very much considered myself a fan of the book. It elicited huge emotional reactions from me, and it was a monster of an undertaking even in terms of the reading experience. I have recommended this book, I have sold this book as a bookseller, and yet as this conversation has progressed and I've heard more viewpoints about it, I'm like, oh, there are a lot of good points being made here. And so I think that my views on this book are very complicated. And those views have been further complicated, I think, by my reception to Yanagihara's work since, particularly this year's To Paradise. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for tightening. Now, part of the success of A Little Life, I think, is its breadth and its scope. It is operatic in its overview, and it really starts by centering this core friend group and looking at their lives as they progress, and we move further and further into the mystery of Jude's tragedy and pain. And I think there is a voyeuristic aspect in the way that is portrayed for sure. This book is on a very notable list of books that have made me cry in a potbelly. Listen, I spent a lot of time in my mid-20s in Potbelly. So it sounds prestigious or not. Maybe it just sounds sad because that's kind of what it is. Other notable Potbelly books include Between the World and Me, but I was still living with roommates when I read this book, and I remember them telling me that my mood was noticeably different while reading this book. There was a definite shift, and it had a clear emotional impact beyond the pages. And I think that that is important to note when we are then looking at moving that to a different medium, particularly the stage, and how it is being accomplished here. Now, for my theater history people, it's almost been a decade, or probably has been a decade since I've taken theater history, and I am by no means saying that this production is theater of cruelty in the textbook sense, but I definitely think that there is an aspect of cruelty in this production. And I don't know that that was unintentional, because some of the articles I've read have talked about the intensity of the emotion and the catharsis, and some people apparently are thanking the production for that afterwards. And many, many people are walking out of the production, and I can't fault them for that. When this production was announced, originally, not the American transfer, I was nervous and worried. I figured, especially considering the director is Ivo Van Hove and this property, this book is so popular, that it would make its way to us. And even at the time it was announced, and I was very much a fan of the book in a more uncomplicated way, I was very nervous. I have lived in fear of this production for many years in some regards. I say that like I'm going to go, and I'm not. But even then, I don't think I would have gone to this production. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And having read the reviews I've read and the reception I've read, I would really lean toward no. And I think we need to look at kind of what we're looking at here and the responsibility of it. And when we talk about content warnings for things, I think this is a production where it would be irresponsible to not let audiences know what they're getting into because it is so intense. First of all, the production is 4 hours long. It is a 4-hour runtime, which is so long. And from what I've read, there are some people who sit on stage, and their reactions to things are part of the whole ambiance and experience, which for someone who doesn't like the fourth wall being broken in my face sounds like my absolute worst nightmare. Like absolute, like with the level of intensity that I know that this production has, that extra layer and the runtime, all of that combined, absolutely not. And if you have ticket buyers that just like being involved in the space, there are many theater people that live and thrive off of that kind of interaction, and that is one of the benefits of the medium. It is something that the medium offers that others don't. So a lot of theater practitioners really enjoy that. And I think on some level, there is clearly an intention to that decision, even if I don't agree with it or personally like it. I can understand the kind of intellectual, creative moment behind that decision, but this whole production seems to be a lot of like big creative decisions that sound interesting and grand and match that kind of operatic scale in some ways, but at the heart, are they decisions that really should be made? And what then does having made those decisions and audiences sitting through that, what does it do for an audience member? And it is definitely supposed to disconcert them. So I think on some level, the theater of cruelty angle, I mean, I don't know enough about Ivo Van Hove's work as a body of work. To be clear, I am a bad theater artist in many ways in that respect, but it feels like it's stemming from something. And on one hand, I am intrigued by these very different big choices being made in the medium. And on the other hand, I don't think the choices are responsible for audiences. And while those choices may serve the story, what is the point of telling that story? And what is the point of telling that story in that way? Because I don't think that the level of catharsis that I think is the aim is going to be achieved in this form. Now, like I said, the book clearly impacted emotions and my emotions in a way that was tangible and observed to me. And I could leave that book when I needed to. I could set it down and step away. And there were many times I needed to set it down and step away. And I had never really considered myself before that a reader who needed to necessarily step away from hard subject matter. But this book takes hard subject matter to another level, and it almost revels in the pain that it can cause its characters and the diversity of pain it can cause its characters and the kind of cosmic jokes and twists that are played on the characters. But again, with a book, I can step away from that moment when I need to. In the play, there is no stepping away from that. And in reading these reviews, I have read a review that says that the 4-hour runtime really does condense everything and hit the major plot points. But I also read a review that said in doing that, in condensing everything, it really centers in on Jude and Jude's story, which admittedly, from a focus, a point of view, a narrative angle makes sense. That's the center that is tying everything together. And when you have to kind of distill everything down, it makes sense that that is what we are focusing on. However, I would assume, and this article alludes to, that this focus then robs the production of the more elaborate, drawn out intricacies of the friendship and also the kind of intricacies of the day-to-day that take place in the book. Because even amidst all of the heartbreak and tragedy, there is still this kind of day-to-day plot to everything that is grounding everything and centering everything. And from what I've read, I think that there is an attempt to communicate that through design choices, specifically projections. So I commend that, But I think that by then focusing so strongly on Jude's journey for 4 hours, there is going to be a lot of emotional weight with that. And even saying just emotional weight feels too small. Additionally, this production is not in English, so audiences, in addition to having to focus on what is happening on stage, the main action, the kind of off-center action that these reviews are alluding to, then also have to pay attention to reading the dialogue, which I don't think I hate because it does offer a kind of shift of focus for the audience members if they do need a break from that emotional immediacy that they can't escape in the theater form, and especially with what I assume is a more intimate space on top of that. However, I can also see that becoming very overstimulating over the course of the production. However, that is neither here nor there because that's just, a fact of the production is that it's not in English. Now, when we talk about Jude's pain, there are references, multiple references in these reviews to self-harm on stage. And while they do say it is pared back from the book, which, to be clear, is not hard to do because it is very prevalent throughout the book and very difficult to read. Very difficult to read. That being said, it apparently still happens multiple times. And keep in mind, this is not the only tragic, hard stage picture that is being embodied in front of you from this source material. However, multiple of these reviews specifically note how difficult that is and that there are times where that is being cleaned on stage, like in the stage maneuvering, which means that there is a presence to that. And I can't imagine how difficult a lot of this is to watch in these spaces and to watch in a communal environment, to be witnessing these horrors together and having no escape from it. You can't really anticipate what your emotional response is going to be, whether there will be a kind of physical manifestation to that response, whether there will be an audible response to that. I saw The Notebook at Chicago Shakes, as I talked about recently, and I was sobbing during that show, trying to control my breathing so it didn't impact those around me or make it too obvious that I was crying. While I think on some level, most all of us going into that theater knew that there was a risk of us crying at some point. To be fair, a lot of people going into this theater probably have an idea of what they're walking into, but I don't think you can fully anticipate how you are going to react to something like that. And I personally think that one of the things I love most about the theater, that communal experience, that shared experience, would be one of the biggest horrors of this production. Like, there are references to people leaving mid-show for this, and that makes sense to me. What if someone has a panic attack in the middle of this production? Like, I just don't know what is the level of responsibility to your audience with this, and what do you bring to audiences, and how do you push audiences in new ways? Because in many ways this feels like an experimental production to see how far we can push audiences, but how far should we push audiences? And on top of the audience reaction, as someone who is friends with a lot of actors, I cannot imagine having to embody this role and go through this journey night after night. And I know there is a level of character work and ideally protection that you do mentally to help separate from that. But I can't imagine that doesn't take a huge mental and physical toll to perform every night. One, because the show is 4 hours, and two, because of the subject matter. And I think this is where I was the most comforted to see a dramaturg on the production, because ideally there were dramaturgical conversations that were happening with the actors to help them kind of work through a lot of this character work, or at least there was resources in place for actors to go to a dramaturg. Again, I don't know the role of this dramaturg in the room, but in theory, there was hopefully something there. That being said, I assume a lot of the dramaturgical conversations were also related to those bigger production choices and what that does for audience impact. There is a lot to balance here. I would assume that some of the dramaturgical work is also in the transition of the material from the page to the stage, but I haven't read anything or seen anything. If you know of any articles or anything that talk more about the way dramaturgy was utilized in this production, I would love to read it because I'm fascinated by what role it played in this production. I think that there are grand opportunities for it here clearly, and I also think that there is a clear and present need for it, and I don't know to what level it was utilized and for what. And a lot of the reviews of this production seem to be really focused in on that idea of torment and this idea that the audience can't look away. But in the same way that the conversation around the book is still very divided and divisive in many ways, it appears that the response to the show is kind of getting the same discourse going. There are both glowing reviews of the production and the kind of scale and scope it takes on and how it achieves that. But then there are also, articles calling into question the why of it and what we are showing and why and what that means for the audience. And so I think all of this just adds more layers to the conversation. And again, this, at least for now, is a limited run. So I don't know if we are going to have to grapple with the kind of ethics of this, the storytelling ethics of this on a larger scale or not, but I definitely think it is worthy of conversation and exploration, and I'm very torn as a reader, a dramaturg, a theater practitioner, because I am very compelled with the translation of this work to stage because it is such an undertaking. I'm intrigued by the choices, and I'm also slightly horrified by them. And I am not one to sit here and say theater should be comfortable and that theater shouldn't challenge you by any means. But how are we challenging? Because there are a lot of very violent productions. And again, these are gross generalizations, but I think that the combination of the violence and the gruesomeness and the voyeurism and spectacle of the pain of this piece combined with a very bared down, stripped down attempt at realism in some way. And it's not realism in like the classic traditional sense, don't get me wrong. But I also think that based on what I've read, and again, I have not seen the production, it is asking the audience to live in those moments without that buffer of extra theatricality. And what is this piece saying beyond the pain that makes that discomfort and potential harm to the audience worth it? I don't know. And I don't think that there are concrete answers to this right now. I would be very, very interested to hear your thoughts on this. Whether you've read the book, whether you've just, kind of heard some of the murmurings of conversation, whether you've seen the play, whether you've read the book and seen the play, I am interested in all aspects of this. And if you have seen this production, I am very, very interested in your thoughts. So yeah, especially because I haven't seen it, I don't know that I'm outright condemning the show, but I am wary, and I was wary even when the concept of the book was less complicated for me. So I'm just very interested to hear what anyone else may think of this, but I think it is a worthy conversation to be having for sure. But for now, those are just some of my kind of initial thoughts, and I will be very interested to hear yours as well. But thanks for hanging out. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah.